so we'll start with, I'll ask everyone to give quick intros about themselves. And then also give like a one-liner on what's really exciting them going forward in the next year. And I'll start with myself. I'm Shalini. I head up partnerships at YouTube. And what I'm really excited about is of course, a lot of artificial learning and machine learning, but also the intersection of that with communities and how we interact as social human beings in a community environment with these machines that are getting smarter and smarter around us. Okay, Manu?
Sure. My name is Madhu. I'm a director at Inventors Capital. It's an early stage firm investing in both the US and India. And what I'm excited about is actually things that will make money. But in all seriousness, we spent a lot of time looking at enterprise and consumer companies, and lately I'm pretty excited about what chatbots will actually end up doing, because it's rare that a new platform comes around. It's every few years. So this is a pretty massive sort of piece, but there's no clarity in what will happen, so that the next couple of years will be pretty exciting.
Hi, I'm Varsha Rao. I head up global operations for Airbnb. Great to be here. What I'm really excited about, I actually just got back from India on Thursday for our India inaugural media launch, if you want to call it that. Really excited about what India offers for Airbnb in the future. We've actually seen tremendous growth over the last year, about 185% year-on-year growth by Indian travelers on Airbnb, and about 115% growth in our listings. So those are people who host to about 17,000. And in general, the global travel market, the Indian travel market, is poised to hit about 40 billion over the next 5 years. And we think that's really exciting. But even more than the actual number, it's the fact that India and Indians present a great opportunity for hospitality that we think is very much in keeping with Airbnb's overall mission. And so we think it's a great intersection. So that's one of the things I'm really excited about.
Hi, I'm Nandini Ramani, and I am responsible for growth in emerging markets for Twitter, as well as I run a team called Engineering Effectiveness. And I have an enterprise background because I used to be at Oracle prior to this, so both Oracle and Twitter. And what am I most excited about? I think for me, the growth in emerging markets is a new initiative for me, and it's been eye-opening. I grew up in Bangalore, but the city's transformed and the country's transformed, and just the opportunity in emerging markets from a community and growth perspective, I think I have to agree with Varsha. I think it's very interesting and not an easy nut to crack, and so I think that's where my focus is for the next few years.
Great. So communities have been around for a while. If you think of the early days of Yahoo with GeoCities, other examples, but of late, there's suddenly been like almost a revolution or disruption in this space. Like if you think of hashtag TiEcon, for example, like every marketing is happening through Twitter. All of our e-commerce is flowing through community-based platforms like Poshmark. And all of us, I'm sure all of us have used Airbnb, and we probably will never go back to renting hotels anymore, right? It's the convenience and the luxury of doing it, but also feeling safe in that. So what's kind of creating this disruption at this time? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure, I can get started. I think communities have been around from a long time ago, right? I mean, I get asked, people these days spend more time on their cell phones. They're not very oriented in connecting with other people, and I think that's the wrong thing. Cell phones and technology actually have brought people far closer together. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I think it's a very human element of connecting. So if you're moving from a small village in India to Bombay or Delhi, or even moving to San Francisco, you've left your tribe behind. You have a new tribe. You want to be able to connect with other people that have similar interests, right? Maybe you love to play chess, but in the building you live in, and 500 other people, maybe somebody else also likes to play chess, right? And how are you going to find that person in the old way? You can't. And I think online communities help you do that. I adopted a daughter 3 years ago, and I had no idea how to raise her because, how do I talk to her about experiences, about how to train her? And I found a community on Facebook that actually talked about that. I think there are things that are actually pretty important, how communities actually bring people together. So it's a human element that drives it, and I think new technologies, new ways of connecting location-specific things actually make communities to come together a lot easier. So I think this trend will continue to happen.
Yeah, sure. I have to agree. I think communities is not a new thing. If you look at Aristotle's quote, and I'm going to paraphrase because diversity is so important. So he said, man is a social animal by nature, and I have to say human beings are, women and men. And I think over time, it's, as technology has evolved, and, we had people meeting in like the market square or, at the Chennai festival or whatever it is, the music season and so on. You have these public gatherings, and then you have gatherings at home, and speaking of hospitality, and I feel like as that evolved and migrated online, I think the logical extension of it is online communities. And it's a nuanced, complex thing of how do you allow for live communities, and Twitter is a lot about that, like live and in the moment type of communities. And at the same time, how do you allow for intimacy? And then as an extension of that, I think the previous conversation about AI and bots, and how do you enable that so it's easier to access, and it's not just that you have to have human beings curating the content or producing the content. And I think all of these things together, I think, causes disruption. But one thing, just as companies, I will say, Twitter has held fast to what the value proposition of Twitter is, which is basically, it's a way to broadcast. It like gives you a megaphone. And so whether it's a 140-character tweet for help, or a bullhorn megaphone that initiates and triggers a revolution, to something more entertaining like NFL and cricket and so on. I think that's the fundamental of the disruption that Twitter caused. But Twitter in and itself was just this broadcast mechanism to everybody else. And community for me has like a twofold nuanced thing to it. One is, what do you bring? How do you bring people together as a community? The other aspect of it is, if you look at the features within Twitter, like retweets and hashtags and @handles and how you reply, when Jack started it, none of that existed. All of these were features that the community created, because I feel like if you open up your platform to the community and developers, there's so much more creativity that comes from everyone else than what you can do on your own. And I feel like disruption is twofold. One is what you bring to the table, and also what everybody else brings to the platform.
So very bottoms up as well.
So I think I totally agree that community is, I think we all were raised in different communities, and those communities, many of our parents and we are still a part of. But I think technology is enabling communities to get scale and spread, even globally. And so one of the things that we see, that's one element, is the technology side. I also think millennials are really driving a new desire and new demands in terms of what they're interested in. The combination of the fact that they're less keen on ownership of everything. They are willing to share more. They're willing to, they're much more focused on experiences as opposed to material things. So one of the things we see is a tremendous desire for local experiences and authentic experiences. Millennials are less interested in traveling in the way that their parents have and in package tours. They're a lot more comfortable doing things on their own. And so for us, we see that driven by the millennial generation. And in the US, the millennials here are greater, the population is even bigger than the baby boomers. And then you put 700 million millennials in India, 400 million millennials in China, and you're having this huge change in the way people are moving, driven by the demands of this new generation. And I think that is something that will stay with us, and it's something that's core to Airbnb.
Okay, so for the sake of the audience here, who are all kind of thinking about communities, how should they be thinking about it? Like, can you just build a community for anything, on everything, and will it affect the bottom line of your business? Can you guys talk about that a little bit from your experiences?
I can start. So for us at Airbnb, community is actually our product. Without hosts and without homes, we don't really exist. So for us, it's been really, really important to build a healthy community right from the beginning. And once you actually do that, you can actually scale pretty globally, relatively fast. And so, the company has been around for 8 years, and yet we're, in 190 countries, 34,000 cities, all really driven by our community. I would say, like peeling back the onion a little bit, while scale is important, one of the founding principles around Airbnb and how we really got started, the founders got a piece of advice from Paul Graham, which is that it's better to have 100 people love you than 1,000 people who kind of like you. So to get the community right, it often really means getting deep, getting close to your customers and understanding what really, really is important to them. And once you get that, it enables you to actually, as you were mentioning, put those features in, address the needs to make sure that the community is really there for the right reasons, and then actually expand from that. I would say the other thing around keeping a community engaged and therefore sustainable is having a mission or a purpose for your community. Because often, a lot of people will say financials are actually not the key motivating driver for many parts of the community. It's actually some sense of belonging. It's a sense of being part of something bigger. And so for Airbnb, one of our key elements, our purpose, is really creating a world where, the 7 billion people feel like they can belong anywhere. And our community really takes that to heart, whether they're hosting one person or they're being a guest. Everybody plays a part in keeping this community really safe. And so the mission piece is something that I think shouldn't be overlooked. It's really key to keeping your community engaged and sustainable.
Yeah, so I'll take a crack at this too. I think I built a few different communities, and a lot of the questions I get from entrepreneurs is like, should I build? How do I build one for myself, and does it make sense for my product? And I think a lot of you guys here are starting your own companies and sort of thinking about these things as well. So I'll give you an anecdote and sort of dive into it. So one of our companies, Poshmark, I remember the first board meeting, the CEO came in and he had a KPI. That had love on it, right? This is how much love our system has created, right? And I loved it. I mean, it was amazing. It's like I'm not going to worry about GMV and everything else. I'm going to tell you how much love our system generated, right? And he's always stayed. It's been 5 years since then. He's completely focused on that piece. And the KPIs that turn around from love in terms of women being able to shop. Men shop very differently than women do, and this product is focused on females. And I do joke with them, he's sort of the Indian Mel Gibson. He figured out what women really do want. But that love factor actually allowed that community to sort of really grow, right? Connecting, so there are women actually talking about anorexia. I mean, they're shopping clothes, but the communities are talking about something completely different, and he allows that to happen, right? 9 out of 10 clothes that get posted by women are actually not for sale. They actually want other women to tell them how good they look in those clothes. So it had nothing to do with transaction. And I think this is where, if you look at eBay, was created around the community, but then they walked away from it, right? As the founder passion went away and they had more managers sort of take over, they didn't sort of get the initial passion why that community was created, right? It was created around small pest things and things you did for garage sales. And I think that's the piece. You have to sort of keep that understanding. It's not about looking at a community to sort of increase your GMV or increase your viral factors. It's actually about delivering a pure value to the person who's using your product. And I think if you start from that angle, everything else sort of takes care of it, right? I mean, why does Tesla have such a good community, but other car manufacturers don't? And I think that, there's a combination of founder passion, a really good product, and an insane focus on making sure that your customers are happy, right? So I think when you build something, don't just focus on, I'm going to just go on Facebook or Twitter and then slap my community, and that group will take over. If you look at most groups on Twitter or Facebook, they're actually, there's nothing but feedback from the person running, the manager running the tweets. But when you look at things that actually get retweets, engagements, that's when you know that somebody's actually engaged with the product, right?
Right, and a lot of companies, including ours, will use handles like on Twitter to set up community forums where we actually are interacting with our customers. Customer support over social has become a big area. Nandini, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to say not only are there communities for pretty much everything, I think I would say there are multiple ways for the same communities to interact. That's one aspect. So if you take something like TaskRabbit, there's basically communities for everything. There's Nextdoor is another way you connect with your neighbors. And So, and each of these have so many competitors in the same space. So that's one aspect of communities. And then the other I would say is you start, and I do believe you want to stay true to the cohorts you're going after and what your particular, whether it's an app or whatever your platform brings to the table is very important. And remember, the virality of getting these cohorts to come together is a multi-year process. And during that time, the market shifts and changes under you. And so the question is, how do you stay true to who the core of what you bring to the table is, and at the same time evolve with the changes that are coming? And two things happen here, I think. One is, like if you take Twitter, our timeline, the core timeline is the value proposition. But we have Moments Maker, and we have DMs, which is a way to direct message and do chats. And the same thing is true if you take WeChat, which is popular in China. There are a gazillion ways to message people. And I, on my phone, have pretty much all of them. I use Line and Snapchat and so on. But each of them have evolved over time, and some companies do it by acquiring properties like Instagram and WhatsApp and others, and they keep them delineated, and others actually fold them into the platform. And you can choose either way, but to keep the core of the cohorts you're going after, and then how do you onboard these communities that are constantly changing? Because I will tell you, we listen to the voice of the customer. So when we changed, I don't know how many of you remember this, but we went from a star to a heart, for those of you who remember. The controversy is immense, right? And we actually listen to the voice of the customer. And we get asked, like, when is Twitter gonna go beyond 140? And so we actually listen a lot. And if you listen to the, for those of you who have seen the Hello World hashtag, like Jack tweets it, and we actually get a lot of product requirements from the communities that use us and listen to the customer's voice. And I think that's the most powerful way of getting engagement, because it's not just about speaking, it's also about receiving acknowledgement of what you're saying. And so
it's not just about support for your community, but you're saying you're also taking features.
Absolutely,
and input. And I don't know how many of you kind of engage with companies to give them feature suggestions, but that's a big one that I think almost all companies now are doing.
Right.
So moving over a little bit to the factor of trust. So in a community, you know, the fact that I can rent a room from someone whom I don't know, clearly, like, I have to have a lot of trust either in the system or in this person. If I'm buying a leather purse that, you know, is going to cost me a couple of $1,000, I want to have the trust that it's a real one. And, you know, on Twitter, for example, we hear that there are a lot of bots that are actually in the conversations, and we're not quite sure. So how do your platforms inspire trust with people? That, yes, I trust the system that I am going to rent something, or I'm going to buy something, or I'm going to engage with it. And Nandini, if you want to start.
Sure, happy to do that. So I know Twitter, we have these, you know, the nuance, the duality, if you will, of being an open platform where we believe that the voice of the person using our platform is really like it's sacred and we cannot block them. And how do you balance that with keeping people safe on the platform? And I will tell you, it is very difficult to do. And Twitter over the years has struggled with it, and I will say it's a huge focus for us, safety. There's multiple ways of looking at trust. One is, like you were mentioning, bots. Like, how do you make sure you don't have spam on the platform? How do you count that the people who are there are actually human beings? And so we've gone a long way to compel that, to curtail that. And I will say our numbers are on par, despite what you hear. Don't believe everything you read in the media. Is on par with the industry standard of all the other platforms.
So all those followers of Donald Trump are real?
Well, I will tell you, I don't know, fortunately, unfortunately, depending on your political inclinations, it is true. And I think that's the other part of it is Twitter and many of these other communities that are built are not controlled by anybody. Like, unlike previously when you had to have a journalism degree and you have to go to a newspaper and then you publish what you have to say. Today we have the voice of everybody constantly there, and we do a lot to ensure that it's not bots and it's not controlled by Fox or, you know, all these big conglomerates. So it's a big deal that we do have these different voices that speak up. So what we are doing, that's one part is about spam, and the second part of it is how do you make people feel safe on the platform? And when you balance that against the fact that you don't want to curtail freedom of speech, the way we are doing it is, yes, of course, we have things to remove abuse and porn and all these other normal things that everybody does, and we have ML and AI and everything to do that. The other thing we're doing is we're giving a lot of controls to the user. If I'm not comfortable with somebody, I can block them. And the bigger challenge for us is how do you get the word out that these features exist? Mm-hmm. Like you can create lists, you can create ways to block people, you can create ways where you have a set of people who can see your tweets and others can't, and so on and so forth. But these features that exist on the platform, people have to learn how to use them. And so they have more control and they feel like they are safe and they are creating the communities that they want to cater to. And I think Twitter does a lot toward that end for a platform that's extremely open and, you know, access to everybody.
I actually didn't know those features existed, so
yeah,
I'm
I'm
learning
sure a
something.
lot of people here
There we
don't.
go. I was actually curious, how many of you guys have actually been a guest on Airbnb? Traveled, like as a user?
Almost
Okay.
the whole room.
That's a pretty good number. How many of you guys have hosted on Airbnb? Okay, so much smaller. And then thinking back, like your entire life, your childhood, your family homes, how many of you ever had any like people stay in your home as like a, you know, extended stranger?
Both hands.
Yeah, see, it's actually, and actually I remember growing up, we had somebody come stay in our home for like 4 months, just like friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. But the concept of hosting has actually been going on for centuries. It's actually not a new concept. And actually it's interesting, there's more people who raised their hands that had people stay in their homes as children and whatnot than currently are hosts. So and the founders will say that, you know, they didn't really invent home sharing and hosting. What the real innovation around Airbnb is really around trust and the ability to enable home sharing and hosting in this global way, in a way that hadn't been able to be done, that had only really been done with people who kind of knew each other or kind of, you know, through extended relationships. And so for us, you know, the innovation of trust has really been something that has been foundational to what Airbnb is. And like, so today, we've had, life to date, we've had over 80 million people stay on Airbnb. And, you know, and first of all, I would say that the process of having a great experience is really, really fundamental to building trust. When you have one great experience and then another great experience, that learning is inherently trust building. But then beyond that, what have we done to kind of build the building blocks of trust? It's been a couple things. So first of all, Airbnb is all about real identities. There's really no place for anonymity on Airbnb. We need to know who you are, and that's done through verified profiles, verified identification, authentic profiles, and also through connecting through social platforms. So we often say that, you know, Airbnb has been built on top of social networks, and that's been quite foundational for us. The second is really around reviews. So having a way that guests and hosts can actually communicate, you know, who's a good host, who's a good guest, who's actually not so good a host or not so good a guest. A two-way review system is really, really important to us. And we've done a lot to actually make sure that those reviews can't be faked. And I think in places like India and Asia, where there's a lot of skepticism around that, that's been actually really important for us to help to make inroads in those markets. The third is really around 24/7 customer support. So, you know, we are there for people around the world in 20 languages in case something, you know, does happen and, you know, get locked out, your host didn't show up when you thought they were going to, and it's a really, really small percentage of situations that happen, but having that safety net in our global platform has been very important for us. And then the last thing is really, I would say, around just making sure that, again, we live up to what we are standing for every day. Being a global brand has been incredibly important for us. And one of the reasons why Airbnb is really a global network effect business. The brand is a key element to building trust, to enable people to feel confident when they're going cross-border. These are long trips. It's a lot of money. It's your personal time. It's a vacation. It's the vacation that you've been planning for a whole year. Making sure that we have a brand that can stand behind that trip has been really important for us to build trust. And then the last thing I would say is we have put some things in place like host guarantee and insurance, so that in the small event that something goes wrong, we're there financially to help people, and that has actually enabled hosts to feel a lot more confident in hosting.
Great. And Manu, in 30 seconds, can you
Sure.
tell me how I
30
get my
seconds.
real purse?
Absolutely. I mean, I was just looking at my $20 bill. It says, "In God we trust," right? So I think trust has been around. This is a financial tender, right? So trust has been around for a long time. And how do you build trust? In a community, it's a three-way trust. It's trust with the company, whether it's Twitter, Airbnb, Google, Facebook, and there's trust between the people, and then trust back and forth, right? So you have to sort of figure out systems, technology systems, and solutions that can actually help you build all those pieces, because it's an investment in building trust, which actually will yield sort of bottom line down the road as well.
Great. So we're a little bit out of time, but I'm going to ask one question, if all of you can just answer it in 30 seconds each. Moving forward, where do you think communities are headed? And what are the opportunities that people in the room can look out for? Starting with you, Manu.
Okay. Well, communities will continue to sort of build out. I think, as people have more tools, the volume will go away from companies sort of controlling it. As you mentioned, you have customer support people, but in a company like Poshmark, the customer support, a lot of the stuff is actually done by people themselves to each other, right? I think giving the tools away, and so you lose control, but your community and your customers will actually take over, right? And I think that's a scary thing for most companies, but it's going that way anyway. So you might as well find solutions to fix it.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think that it's really, it's incredibly interesting to be able to, build a community and then actually leverage your community to do a lot of what you might think of actually critical tasks or critical input. So whether it is, helping answer questions about what your product is, that can largely be done by a very, very passionate community. Helping to actually choose products or source products for you that might be better done by crowdsourced by millions of people in the community, as opposed to a small team that is going to largely be limited by information or their own points of view. So I actually think the benefits of community will be allowing people to do more and more through the community, and it actually allows you to have global scale in a much better way, which I think is very exciting.
I would say, as much as we, at least most of us here, are consumer, we've been talking about consumer communities around the B2C consumer space. I do think we don't want to narrowcast it as much as that, because, I'd love for you all to just build on the Twitter platform, but I think if you ask me, I would say the broad answer is, if you look at things like Slack, and, there are lots of communities for enterprise. Arguably, even source code management is a community platform. So I will say, I think growth is, you will see a convergence of communities on both the enterprise and the B2C, B2B2C sort of space. And I would encourage you to focus more on that sort of area where there is an overlap and potentially growth. While, of course, there are lots of communities on the pure chat and messaging and so on and so forth. But I firmly believe there is a convergence that's waiting to be unlocked.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is communities are here to stay. They're combining the physical with the online, and it's really what's allowing all of you to grow at global scale. And I think all of you in the audience should really pay heed. I think that all of the companies that you're starting with can also benefit from communities. So with that, I'd like to thank the panel. Varsha, do you have a comment?
Or build tools to help manage the community.
Yeah. Amen.
Thank you very much.